Welcome to Payback with Silas. Every day, a new story, lies, betrayal, payback. Let's begin.
I still remember that day like it happened yesterday, though it's been years since. The air in the kitchen was thick with tension, the late afternoon sunlight casting long shadows over the worn-out linoleum floor. I sat across from my father, my hands clutching the edge of the table, trying to steady the storm inside me. I had just shared my plans, spilling out every hope I had for my future, college, coding, starting something on my own. His eyes, cold and unblinking, stared back like I was a disappointment he hadn't expected to face so soon. "You're pathetic, Samir," he said, his voice low but cutting through the room like a blade. "You'll never amount to anything. You don't have what it takes." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The weight of those words pressed down on me harder than anything I'd felt before. It wasn't just that he didn't believe in me, it was the way he said it, as if I was already dead before I'd even started living. Like I was a mistake, a failure waiting to happen. I wanted to scream, to beg him to see me, to understand what I was feeling. But the words got stuck in my throat. So I just sat there, frozen. The silence between us was deafening. My father leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like a judge passing sentence. "Stop dreaming. You're wasting your time. You'll end up like your uncle, stuck, bitter, forgotten." He was right about one thing: my uncle had given up. But I wasn't him. I left the room without another word. Outside, the world felt too big and cold. I walked to the edge of our backyard, staring up at the sky, willing myself not to break. That night, I didn't cry. I couldn't. There was too much pride mixed with the pain. But inside, a fire was ignited, fierce, unrelenting. Not born from anger, but from something deeper. From a quiet determination that whispered, "You will prove him wrong. You don't have to listen to what he says." Over the next months and years, those words haunted me. They followed me into classrooms, into late-night coding sessions, into every failure and setback. Every time I doubted myself, I heard that voice, "You're pathetic." And every time, I used it like fuel. It wasn't easy. I struggled with self-doubt, loneliness, and the crushing weight of not just failing, but failing in their eyes. My family stopped talking about my dreams after that day. They didn't ask about my projects or college applications. The silence was worse than the words. But I kept moving forward. I learned to code, started small projects, took every rejection letter as a challenge. I worked in coffee shops, on buses, anywhere I could find a quiet corner. The pain from home was a constant companion, but it also sharpened me. Looking back now, I realized that moment was both a curse and a blessing. It was the day I stopped asking for permission to dream. The day I decided success would be my revenge, not through confrontation, but through undeniable achievement. That kitchen, those words, they still echo inside me. But they no longer have power over me. After that day in the kitchen, everything changed. Not overnight, but slowly, painfully. I didn't have a roadmap or a mentor who believed in me. What I had was a tiny room in my mom's cramped apartment in Mountain View, a second-hand laptop that barely worked, and a mind full of ideas no one wanted to hear. School was a battleground. I wasn't the kid with the best grades or the loudest voice. I was the quiet one, scribbling notes, staying late after class to mess around with code. Teachers called me determined, which was a polite way of saying I was stubborn as hell. I'd watch other kids get praise or opportunities, while I got overlooked, invisible. But every time I felt invisible, I reminded myself of that kitchen. My father's words became a challenge I couldn't ignore. I wasn't going to be pathetic. I was going to build something so real, so undeniable, that even he couldn't ignore it. I remember my first real project. I was 19, barely scraping together money from part-time jobs, washing dishes at a greasy diner, delivering pizzas, anything to pay for books and internet. I built a simple app that tracked local farmers markets and helped small vendors connect with customers. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't sexy. But it worked. That app barely made a dent, But it taught me something crucial. Success wasn't about overnight fame or billions of dollars. It was about creating something people needed, something useful. It was about persistence. Sometimes I thought about giving up. The nights were long and lonely. Coding until 3 a.m., my eyes burning, my fingers numb. Watching classmates go to parties, date, have lives that felt light and easy, while I wrestled with lines of code that refused to cooperate. But I held on. I got into San Francisco State with a scholarship, which was a small victory in itself. That city, foggy, chaotic, full of dreamers and hustlers, became my second home. I worked harder than I ever had, building connections, pitching ideas, joining hackathons. I learned to speak the language of Silicon Valley, buzzwords, venture capital, scaling. Still, no one around me expected me to make it. They saw a kid from a broken home, who had no pedigree, no flashy background. Just Samir, the guy who once got told he was pathetic. I refused to be just a statistic. I poured every dollar I had into my projects. I failed more times than I can count. I pitched to investors and got laughed out of the room. I watched friends give up, choosing safer paths. But every rejection, every closed door was a lesson. I studied what worked, what didn't. I built a vision in my head that nothing could shake. By the time I was 23, I had a small team, a handful of other misfits and believers, working in a tiny, rented space in Soma. We had a startup called Nuvix, focused on AI-driven tools for small businesses. It was rough, chaotic, and unpredictable. But it was ours. And I was ready to make sure no one would ever call me pathetic again. By the time Nuvix started gaining traction, I thought I was ready for anything. I was 24, leading a scrappy team of dreamers in a tiny Soma office, fueled by too much coffee and even more ambition. But nothing prepares you for the sting of failure when everything feels like it's riding on your shoulders. Our first big investor pitch was supposed to be a turning point. We had polished our deck, rehearsed answers, and refined the prototype until every feature sparkled. I walked into that boardroom on 3rd Street feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. This was the moment to prove that we weren't just another wannabe startup. But as soon as I started talking, I felt it, the subtle, dismissive glances from the venture capitalists. The way one of them whispered to another during my demo. The polite but empty nods that said, "We've seen this before." When the questions came, they weren't about innovation or vision. They were about my background. "Samir, do you have the experience to lead a tech company? What makes you think you can compete with the giants in Silicon Valley?" I could see their skepticism like a wall between us. I tried to answer, but my words sounded hollow even to me. We left the meeting with nothing but vague promises to keep in touch. It was a gut punch. A stark reminder that talent alone wasn't enough. That in this game, pedigree and connections mattered. That despite all my work, I was still an outsider. That night, I sat alone in the office, the glow of my laptop the only light. I wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But instead, I forced myself to reflect. I thought back to my father's words, "You're pathetic. You'll never amount to anything." The bitterness bubbled up, but alongside it, something sharper emerged, a clearer sense of purpose. Failure was a crucible. It was refining me, burning away the doubts and fears, shaping me into the leader I needed to be. I called my team the next morning. We had a long conversation about what went wrong, about what we could learn. We changed our approach, focusing more on building a community, on real user feedback instead of chasing big checks too early. We started small, refining our product to solve actual problems for actual people. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. We lived on ramen noodles, crammed in that tiny office, sleeping only a few hours a night. But the more we adapted, the more we grew. By 25, Nuvix had its first real users. Small businesses that swore by our tools. It wasn't a Silicon Valley fairy tale, but it was real. It was proof that we were moving forward, on our own terms. And with every small win, I felt the old chains loosening. The chains of doubt, of invisibility, of being pathetic. But the road was far from over. The deeper I went, the more I realized the fight wasn't just with investors or the market, it was with every voice that had ever told me I wasn't enough. Especially the one that still echoed loudest in my mind. By the time I was 26, Nuvex had grown from a scrappy little startup into something real. Not a giant yet, but a company with momentum, paying customers, and a small but fiercely loyal team. We'd moved out of that cramped Soma office into a slightly bigger space near the Embarcadero, glass walls, a view of the bay, a taste of the dream that felt both distant and closer than ever. But the biggest change wasn't the office or the revenue. It was in me. I remember waking up one morning and looking in the mirror, really looking. For the first time in years, I didn't see the kid who'd been dismissed, ignored, called pathetic. I saw someone who had fought tooth and nail to build something against every odd, someone who refused to break. That morning, I made a decision. It was time to stop hiding in the shadows of doubt and silence. It was time to confront everything I'd been running from, especially the past. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, I got an email from a prestigious tech conference in Palo Alto, the Vanguard Summit. They were looking for young innovators under 30 who were changing the game. I debated for days whether I was ready. Imposter syndrome whispered loudly, but I ignored it. When the day came, I stood on that stage, my heart pounding in my chest. I spoke about Nuvex, about our mission to empower small businesses through AI, about the struggles I'd faced. For the first time, I didn't hide my story. I owned it. The crowd listened. And then, something incredible happened. I was awarded the Vanguard Prize, a recognition for the most promising young entrepreneur of the year. Holding that trophy, I felt the weight of every doubt, every insult, every sleepless night lift off my shoulders. I wasn't just successful, I was validated. But the victory wasn't just mine. It was for every quiet kid told they weren't good enough. For every overlooked dreamer fighting to be seen. That night, as I drove my brand new Ferrari home, a symbol of how far I'd come, I couldn't resist the urge to visit my parents. I pulled up to the house in Redwood City, the same one where those brutal words were spoken. The silence in the driveway was thick. They didn't come out. No congratulations, no apologies. Just quiet. And I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. About proving to myself that I was enough, no matter what anyone said. I'm still building Nuvex every day, still learning, still growing. But now, I do it on my own terms, with a heart that's finally free. Winning the Vanguard Prize was more than just a moment of glory, it was a door opening to a whole new world. Suddenly, investors who had ignored me before were calling. Tech journalists wanted interviews. Even some of the old skeptics started paying attention. But with that attention came pressure, to grow faster, to scale bigger, to prove that the award wasn't just a fluke. At 27, I found myself navigating a landscape I'd only dreamed about, balancing investor demands with the vision I'd fought so hard to protect. Nuvex was expanding rapidly, hiring engineers, marketers, salespeople. The company culture I'd nurtured, one of grit, transparency, and resilience, was being tested. There were days when I felt like I was running a marathon with no finish line. Burnout crept in. I wrestled with imposter syndrome in a new form. Am I really the person who deserves this? The voices from the past weren't gone, they just sounded different, more insidious. But I was no longer the scared kid in Redwood City. I built routines to keep my mind sharp, morning runs along the bay, weekly calls with a mentor named Elise who taught me how to lead without losing myself, and quiet evenings with friends who reminded me what life outside the office looked like. And then there was Emma. We met at a tech mixer in San Francisco, a fellow entrepreneur with a fierce intellect and an easy laugh. Our connection was instant but slow burning, built on mutual respect and shared ambition. Emma wasn't just my partner, she was a grounding force, a reminder that success was richer when shared. Together, we dreamed bigger, not just about Nuvex, but about the kind of life we wanted to build. Family. Stability. Happiness. Still, I kept the past close, not as a burden, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. The silence from my parents remained, but it no longer defined my worth. Every day, I woke up determined to build something lasting, a company that didn't just chase profits, but made a difference. A legacy I could be proud of. I wasn't just proving my father wrong anymore. I was proving to myself that no word, no doubt, no obstacle could chain me. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, I was driving, with confidence, purpose, and peace. It's been almost a year since I stood on that stage, clutching the Vanguard prize. Since I drove my Ferrari into the driveway of that old Redwood City house, the house that tried to hold me down with silence and scorn. Since then, so much has changed. Nuvex is no longer a scrappy startup. It's a recognized force in the AI space, trusted by hundreds of businesses nationwide. We've expanded our team, moved into a sleek new office overlooking the bay, and started projects that once seemed impossible. But the biggest change is inside me. I still haven't spoken to my father. The silence between us is thick, but it's no longer painful. I've accepted that some bridges burn, and some wounds don't heal the way you want them to. That's not weakness, it's reality. Instead, I've built my own family with Emma. We're planning a home together, dreaming about kids and a life filled with love and laughter, not judgment or doubt. Every day, I work not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove to myself that resilience, patience, and belief can move mountains. Sometimes, I think back to that kitchen table. To the day when pathetic was a sentence, not a word. Now, it's just a word. One that belongs to the past. I am not pathetic. I am not a failure. I am a man who fought, who fell, who got back up. Who built a company, a life, and a legacy. And that is my victory.